Hey, Ryan, what do you got to show us today?
I think I'd like to talk about Zed today. Last time we talked a little bit about OpenRouter, and maybe actually before we start, I can talk about the rankings and things like that. But going through OpenRouter, I've been looking at tools and trying to figure out. I guess I feel like I'm getting old, Jason, honestly, and I feel like sometimes there's just so many new tools coming out. I can't touch them all, but I do want to be aware of them. And one that's been bubbling up is called Zed, the editor. Have you heard of this before?
Oh, yeah, you've mentioned it a few times. I have not actually looked at it myself, though.
Listen, I can show you the rankings and
Yeah.
figure out what's going on here. But
Take a look.
basically, at the bottom of this page, sorry, we've been through this before. This is just the
Mhm.
OpenRouter rankings. It's up here on the top right. Generally, I stay at the top of this page. I want to know what model other people are using. If there's anything new, anything cheaper, basically, that I can use, or maybe faster, I'd like to try it out. For example, I watch like a Hawk if there's a competitor to Sonnet 3.7 or 4, or maybe even if there's anything developing in the Gemini side, because I found that context window helps quite a bit. But at the bottom of this page, I had somehow had missed it. There's a list of all the top apps. Now, this is today. And what I noticed is over the month, there was one that was climbing up the list pretty quickly, which was a surprise to me because I hadn't seen it before. But the Z editor here, the one that has a new under it, it finally hit these rankings basically. This isn't to say that Z wasn't popular, but I'd say that it's becoming more popular within the people who are using OpenRouter in order to get access to APIs. So Gen AI APIs. And Zed itself, they will say is like a collaborative editor. And it does, it has collaborative features. So I could share a session with you. We could work on the same code together. I could just share some code, that kind of stuff as well. But I found the lineage of this project pretty interesting. Do you remember the old editor named Atom? I think
Oh, yeah.
GitHub at one point in time had it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, same here. I really liked Atom. I found it really fast. And when Visual Studio Code came out to replace it, I was a little bit maybe not miffed is maybe not the right term, but I felt bad because I was losing a tool that I actually really liked. So I had gone from Sublime Text to Atom at the time. I really liked the speed. And though the S code is great, don't get me wrong, one of the things I really didn't like about it and still don't is that when you click to open it, it takes a long time. So if you just need a quick scratch pad to edit a file and then get in and get out, I still reach for Sublime. Zed is promising speed that is that level. Now, they say it's because they developed it in Rust. That could be the case. I have a feeling that because it's a newer editor and they're optimizing for speed, that they made it faster. That being said, there are a lot of fast Rust apps out there, so I won't discount that. And in fact, the terminal that's being used within Zed is actually Alacrity, which is also written in Rust and is quite fast. And I feel like because I spend a lot of the time in the terminal, I'm sure you do as well, even if you're just chatting with Gen AI, you'll notice the terminal speed if it's slow, especially if you're in an editor. So the main reason I reached for Zed was for that speed, being able to open up something quickly, edit a file, and close it. Not that Sublime isn't great. I have papered, I am licensed, but I do like to look at newer tools. And when I saw it on the list, or at least getting into that top 10, I figured it was probably time to look at it again. Now, do you subscribe to TLDR, those newsletters? Do you see
Yeah.
those sometimes? Okay.
Yep.
So this was mentioned in TLDR as being like a front end for Cloud Code, or I think the way they mentioned it was Cloud Code is now integrated. And there are ways of doing that. But I think as you and I discussed, like Cloud Code is great on its own. I actually don't need a Cloud Code replacement. The main thing I have problem with is because I use Cloud Code so often, I run out of credits a lot. So for me, I'm always looking for newer places to get it. So that's why I reached for Zed AI tools, basically. Now I'm going to go through a quick overview of the webpage. Obviously, you can scroll through this yourself, but a lot of the things that you'll see in here are people just, yeah, it just works as the branding. It just works. And I think some of the features in here that are newer that I thought were pretty interesting. One was the debugger. The debugger is actually pretty cool. The second is, sorry, I'm scrolling a little bit too fast, is the diff view. And I'll go through that in a moment here in the example. And the other is agentic editing. I think this is maybe not table stakes, but becoming more commonplace. That most editors will allow you to both chat with a Gen AI application as well as edit the code and grab the context from the editor that you're in. So that helps, especially if the editor has, we were talking about language servers last time when we were talking about other editors, but if it has a language server, then it'll allow you to do things like, say, if you're loading a Python app and there are bugs in it, it can concentrate on those bugs and use the hints from the language server in order to go down that path of debugging, which is pretty handy. Now, there aren't language servers for every language yet because this is still early days, but for the most part, you'll find the ones that you need. Now, there's a bunch of other ones in here. So remote development, editor prediction, multi-buffer editing. I think most of these are pretty commonplace. Multi-buffer editing might be a little bit more something I'm used to in Emacs. So you'd have like multiple windows up editing and you can actually decide what happens to them essentially. So you can move them around. All right. Long story short, don't bore us. Get to the chorus, I guess is what we'd say on the team. But basically, this is what it looks like. Now, I put this in light mode. It definitely doesn't need to be in light mode, but I thought for readability, it might be a little bit easy. And what I wanted to show was the selection of models. Now, I tried to zoom in. I will say one of the things I noticed is that this editor doesn't really do well with lower screen rises. So this is 1080p. Hopefully it's viewable. I tried to zoom in on the text. This menu doesn't zoom in, but we'll quickly go through these and I'll point out some of the things that I think are interesting. So the first is if you've got a GitHub account and you've got access to Copilot, you can straight up just use that GitHub Copilot in Z for most of the features. So when we're talking about text editing, command completion, all those things, those will all work. Now, you can sign up with Z in order to get access to what is probably the orchestration layer on the back end. But I feel like being able to bring your own models to different roles or different actions is maybe a little bit better. We talked before about like lightweight LMs in terms of being able to edit code, as opposed to more heavier weight or reasoning language models, which I find are better for big project kind of things like architecture or planning, that those kind of tasks. So like a Cloud Opus, for example. And then between those two, you'll have something like Sonnet, either 3.5, 3.7, or 4. And again, if you're going to OpenAI, this might be like a 4.1 or a GPT 4.0, or maybe you're using like GPT 5 in terms of orchestrating between the two. But regardless, one of the things I thought was interesting is that you can use Olama in this quite easily. In fact, I think you can use LM Studio as well for local stuff. And I did go through testing GPT OSS 20B, which is the open source model from OpenAI. It worked pretty well actually within the app. So if you want to use something offline on the airplane, it feels like Z is poised to be a pretty easy, low overhead editor. And I found personally, listen, I love Olama, but I found personally that LM Studio was actually faster with GPT OSS, and I was using the MLX version, so the one made for Metal or Mac. But again, if you've run out of those credits and you need to reach for Sonnet, but you can't get it from Anthropic because you're out of credits, this is what I've been using. So I'll default back to 3.7. I've used it before. It's perfectly fine. Again, you could go through and use GPT 4.0 or 4.1. And then, of course, through Z, you can get access to some of these cloud models as well. I believe you have to pay for these features. And listen, no harm, no foul. I totally get it. Everyone needs to make money. But for me, I would prefer to be able to get something that's a little bit better than just using Cloud Code. Because honestly, Cloud Code is really good. So if I'm using Cloud Code for Sonnet, I might as well just go back to it until I'm out of credits. Anyway, long story short, that's the main thing in terms of Gen AI applications. Now, the rest of the editor is actually cool. So you can see that I've got something open here that I like, which is called the editor window. So one of the main problems that I find when you're actually going through and looking at code is when you're generating code with an assistant, a lot of what you're trying to do is actually look at diffs. And I found this diff view is actually quite nice. So I like this little, the way that it displays the diff view for me is actually pretty easy to read. So I thought that's pretty cool. So what I'm doing is looking at all of the edits here across multiple files, and I can scroll through and look at them. Now, also, we mentioned the terminal before. I found this terminal was actually quite good. We'll use HTOP instead. But you can even see, like, it's difficult to explain, but when I'm typing, in fact, it feels a lot more responsive than usual. So I don't know if this is the Alacrity special sauce, but things just feel good. Now, depending on the IDE that you're using, you can actually see the refresh rate for this browser, and it does use GPU acceleration. My understanding is it refreshes at 120 hertz, which is probably why it feels so snappy. So again, it's difficult to show when you're screen sharing, but things are very snappy. So when I press a button, it feels like it's already actioning it as soon as I hit the key, as opposed to thinking and actioning. And I know that sounds silly, but in VS Code, it actually feels pretty sluggish a lot of the times.
Yeah, no, I think for a lot of us, it's little things like that can be the differentiator between tools that we use. So just that immediate feedback of what we're doing. Especially, I get so frustrated when there's latency. Now, this isn't always the fault of the app. Sometimes it's like the connection
Right.
of your network or something like that. But yeah, when there's latency, that I'll tap something on, maybe I'm working on my iPad and there's like maybe I don't know, a 50 millisecond delay. And so I'll instinctively go to tap again. But
Yes,
as I'm
hit it
doing
twice.
that, the first thing pops up. And so I'm actually hitting something else, which sends me. So
Right.
then, yeah, I start to see red and I black out and it's, yeah. But yeah, the things like little things like that make a huge difference. That's why, like in the SRE world, people talk about setting up observability from the user's perspective, because it's that experience right there that would sometimes make me just close my laptop and go find a different tool. But that's not necessarily something that companies are like monitoring for, is the table flip because of a latency issue that seems minor, but it can actually be quite a bit.
Yeah, I feel like we talk a bit about frustration signals and maybe on the web, somebody's jiggling their mouse, clicking in frustration. I'm not sure if I've ever seen frustration signals for desktop apps, but you're absolutely right. It's like those small things. And I thought it was me for the longest time. I thought like everyone's using VS Code. It can't be this slow for everyone. But when I talk to people, everyone says, yeah, absolutely. Like cursor slow, Windsor slow, VS Code is slow, VS Codium is slow, code servers, like everything that uses this suite of tools is slow. And it's not that it's really slow. It's just like 85% speed. You know what I mean? It's just that little bit, but we notice that little bit collectively. And I guess I'm happy somebody's doing something about it. That the goodwill is here. That I feel like the people who are integrating Alacrity into their editor are the people who really care about speed. So I was pretty happy to see
Yeah,
it. Now,
I think that's important to point out. Slow is qualitative, I think. So
right.
maybe some people might
Absolutely.
like slow. Maybe some people have just never experienced fast, and so they actually don't even
Also true.
realize the difference. So it's all contextual, or yeah, depending on what you
Yeah.
can compare it to.
Listen, I've talked to people who have used Vim instead of VS Code because they found VS Code slow. So there's certainly the people out there. I feel like that's a little bit harsh, jumping straight to just going to the command line. But anyway, here we are. I think when you're in the command line, then you've got a different problem because it depends on the tool that you're using. But
Yeah,
I do want to quickly go over the license because I found this a bit confusing. So I hadn't seen this before, like an unknown and two other licenses found. We talked about the fact that it's embedding Alacrity. So there could be some of that in there. But just in terms of licenses, so as far as I can tell, this is GNU Affero. I'll just pull it up here, right here, in case this is any concern to you. So it's GNU Affero version 3. And then I think down here, there's possibly another license because there's some confusion. Maybe it's the one at the top, but there's also some Apache code in here as well. Now, other than the GitHub site, which has listen, a lot of participants, is very active. I think we talked a little bit about Adam, but also one of the creators of Tree Sitter, which I think Datadog supports, for example, is also in this, which is pretty cool. Tree Sitter is like a very commonly used app for looking through a repo to see what's essentially going on with the repo. Now, I did want to talk about features just a little bit because I can't show them all. And there's a great webpage that shows all the features, obviously. But I did want to talk about a couple. So I mentioned the CLI. It's actually like you can use Z from the CLI by setting your editor, just like you would with Cursor or what have you, and pull things up, which is fantastic. The other is this collaboration. So Jason, for example, if you had signed up to Z, I could straight up go and look by name and find you and share code with you, which is fantastic. Also, a little bit of alarm bells in my head, depending on what your username is or how you're signing up. I didn't see any way to opt into this search, for example. So perhaps if you don't want to be on this list, maybe you need a different GitHub account. I'm sure they'll figure this out. But for me, as an enterprise use case, this kind of rubbed me a little bit the wrong way just because like, all the users are in here. So if I type in Jason, all
yeah,
the Jasons who use the app are in here, which I thought was like maybe not great. But it does mean sharing is very easy. So anyone who uses the app, and I'll show that in a second in the app. The only other thing in here that I thought was really cool was diagnostics through the editor itself. So if you needed to go like project wide diagnostics or just within, sorry, project wide or versus within just one file, I thought that was actually pretty neat in terms of the scope. There are some things about File Finder. I didn't actually get file finding. I didn't find this any faster, and this might be like a Mac thing. I've yet to try Z on Linux, but I found the file finding was so-so. It took a minute to pull up the results.
mm,
Again, I'm on a corporate laptop, so it could be something like maybe some settings on that side going on. I did find that interesting. And then the last one here is this integrated terminal. So I mentioned Alacrity, for example. It's got this as the backend. I was showing this off as we were talking, but you can resize and move around the terminal as well if you want to, like undock it, have it to the side, which I find fantastic because I'm in the terminal pretty much all day, every day. Now, back to the editor, I just want to quickly show off the sharing. So if we go up, I think it's Command Shift C for sharing. Good thing I remember this keyboard shortcut. Now, again, I mentioned some weirdness about screen res. If you're at 720, you can't move this bar, which I thought was weird. But what I find cool in here is that I can see all these projects and see who's working on what. So if I want to go into Python, for example, I can actually go through and look at, we're not going to go into here, so we're going to escape. But we did join a channel there. I'm not sure if you could hear the audio. I definitely could, but there certainly were people in there chatting. So what you could do is actually join rooms and work on projects with people, but those seem to be public. So when I create a room and I call it like, I don't know, Jason and Ryan's secret room, my understanding is that other people will see that room. So if you want to work in public, you're good to go. If you don't want to, I feel like this is a feature that they're still working on. But anyway, I just wanted to show that off.
Yeah.
But basically, you can just hop into a channel, work on stuff, share your screen, share some code, or just share audio and video. Or just share audio, which is actually pretty cool for collaboration within your editor. Sorry, that was a lot to say. There's a lot of features in this app. It's brand new. It's changing a lot. Some of these features are like literally just launched last week. So it's a cool space to watch. But I would say at the very least, if you're looking for something that's got a fast terminal or is fast to start, it's pretty good. If you're looking for essentially another source of editing for extra Claude credits that aren't necessarily in VS Code, but you do want to go through GitHub, for example, or if you want to code on the plane using a Llama or LM Studio, this seems like a good option, essentially, is what I'll say. It's possibly not the best editor in terms of language server and extension support because it still is early days. But if you're in the Rust world, for example, this seems to be gaining steam. Or if you're in the Python and JavaScript world, it seems like your support is there already. Phew, that was a lot. My apologies. There's a lot to get through.
No, that was awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. And yeah, some really interesting and novel pieces of functionality in there. We did not hear any other folks in the chat that you
Fantastic. They weren't saying anything bad, but I just felt bad like putting them on blast, basically.
Yeah, no, everything's good there. But yeah, fascinating feature. I'll have to think about how I would use that, or if I would use that, I
Right.
guess. And so, but yeah, awesome. I'll have to go dive into Zed now, but appreciate it, Ryan. And yeah, we'll talk to you next time.
Awesome. That was fun. Thank you.
See ya.